So welcome, everybody. So glad to have you tonight. We know it's been a really intense time of the past few weeks and months in the world of hiring and tech especially. So if you want to bring a few slides, Rashi, we thought that would be a good idea to have this topic together. And I'm a longtime friend and fan of Rashi, and I was blown away about her approach to job hunting. So we figured we don't even need a panel today. We just wanted to hear from Rashi on her experience, having been both on the hiring side as a manager in growth marketing, but also as someone who got hired recently. So really, really cool. I don't see the slide, Rashi. Do you mind?
There I can't share my screen apparently.
Oh, of course, need to have sharing permission. That should be all set.
Okay.
Sorry for that. So as I said, as part of the Xugler community, I think a big goal of us is always to be transparent and candid and really being helpful. So we wanted just to start by hearing from you today. If you're looking for a job, maybe you can write in the chat looking, and I'll go back to that, no worries. Just wanted to get to the poll so we have a good sense of who's in the room, if you don't mind. And then we'll do proper intro. So if you're looking for a new role in growth marketing, just put looking in the chat. If you're hiring, just put hiring in the chat. And we'd love any additional information so we can really tailor that conversation to you today. Are you finding anything hard in the process today? And you'd love to hear from the group, obviously from Rashi, but also from the group. And if there's anything specific you're looking for tonight, so it can give us a little bit of context. So please don't be shy. Looking. And while people just write a few notes, just wanted to do a quick intro. I'm Veronique Lafargue. I'm based in Palo Alto. I was at Google from 2009 to 2016, first marketing person for Google Cloud, works on Google Maps. And since that, I've been CMO of different startups. And most recently, I launched my own practice. So I'm the founder of Maison Lafargue. We're a boutique marketing agency helping early stage founders. Rashi, do you want to give a little bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I started my career at Google. I was there in Google India from 2007 to about late 2011, mostly in ad sales and digital marketing. I completely pivoted my career from big tech to startups right after that. And so been in a number of different startups, early marketing hire, mostly been in acquisitions, customer acquisitions and retention expansion, built a career around it. And my most recent role has been also in a SaaS company leading PLG and PLS user growth. So I'm happy to share a little bit about what I've learned so far and what's helped me in my job hunt process. And hopefully some of it, if not all of it, is helpful to everyone here.
And Rashi, for those who are not familiar with acronyms, PLS and PLG?
Yes, sorry about that. I keep doing that. And thank you for reminding me. Just for those who may not be familiar with some of these terms, PLG refers to product-led growth, where the product sells itself. So essentially, think of any product where you don't need a sales team to interact with. You can just go to their website, understand what the product is about, and essentially sign up. Something like Zoom, maybe. PLS would be product-led sales, where there's a little bit of product that does the education on what the product core value is for you. But you do need a sales team because it's a little bit more complex to understand how you'd use it potentially for you and your team and your organization. So that's traditionally known as product-led sales. And so a lot of SaaS companies today have either one or both of those motions, and we'll talk a bit about that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I'm seeing in the chat, we have many people looking for new roles or evolving from existing roles and also interested in hiring. So a good spectrum. Why don't we share what we want to cover today? If you can go to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to start talking about a hiring framework. We feel like understanding the behind the scene is really important, especially a lot of people who are have just left Google now are thinking about going to startups. And there's a framework that Rashi is intimately familiar with, coming from, inspired by YC. So we thought that would be interesting to cover this. So understanding a little bit what's happening in the head of recruiters. Also really thinking about the company and candidate market fit, if you want. Like, what is a good fit? How to think about the different stages. Reverse interviewing, really important skill. We all know it's not just about you pitching yourself with the company, but how do you get to extract the most information to really also forge your own opinion about what's happening. So have some really concrete tips. And again, this session will be very practical, so you can hopefully take away some of the learnings and apply them. So we're going deep and concrete here. We'll share some resources. Obviously, there's some about the high-level Xogler community, the Slack channel, but Rashi has been really kind and put together a list of specific resources for people in growth marketing. And we want to keep time for Q&A. So that's really our goal, give you frameworks, applicable and informative information, and then make the process work as smooth as it can. Did I miss anything, Rashi, or are we?
No, I think you covered it all.
Okay, let's get started.
Let's get started. All right. Before I get started, one quick disclaimer. Everything I share today is in complete transparency, a lot of candor. I feel like, there's a lot of room in the world for us to share a little bit more about how we land roles or how our careers progress, how do we pivot, how do we really build a career for ourselves. And I don't think we speak enough about it, especially the interviewing process. How does one prep and how does one go from an IC level to a management to a leadership level? And so a lot of the ethos today is to do that. So I'm sharing a lot of the examples from my specific experiences at roles that I've taken in different companies. And if you take a look at my LinkedIn profile, you'll see a lot of that adding up. But what I really want to do is not keep this as a monologue. I'd love to make this interactive and fun for all of us. This really is to help all of you guys over here. So feel free to interject and ask me questions, clarify something, or even frankly have a debate on something. I think all of our experiences are very unique and very different in their own ways. People are at different altitudes of their careers. They're navigating different challenges. So I want to make sure that this is as contextual and helpful for everyone. With that, we're going to get started with a startup hiring framework that I was made familiar with in one of my most recent roles that I took on. This is something when, to be honest with you, when I started the framework, I was like, what is this? We're all seasoned hiring managers. We know how to do this. But honestly, I found that this framework is something that has really helped me uncover what they call as A players. And I also like to call them A players. And really, what I mean by an A player is not someone who's the creme de la creme, who has pedigree, who's come from all these fancy schools and fancy big tech companies, but an A player is someone who's a really, really good fit for the role that you're looking for or that you have open for specifically your environment and your company and the types of problems you want to solve there. So that's an A player. I'm not going to take credit for any of this. I believe that a lot of this framework has been inspired from YC. I think Y Combinator, we're all aware of it. It's an accelerator. It's an VC investor as well. And a lot of their portfolio companies, I believe, follow this process of hiring framework as well. And we've learned a lot from it.
What are you doing?
All right, I think there's someone who's speaking to someone else, but that's okay. The book that this was inspired by is called Who, the A Method for Hiring by Geoff Smart and Randy Strait. There's a video link, which is really phenomenal that y'all can all go through as well, which kind of explains what this whole methodology is and the different segments of it and why it's specifically set up like this. In fact, this talk is actually at Google. So you'll find that super helpful. It's a little bit of a long talk, but it really helps. Ethos is that a lot of the study had found that one of two people hired in a team is often not a good fit. This was about 15 to 20 years ago. And they often find that not everyone is successful, no matter what kind of a job interview process you go through. They don't ultimately deliver on the results that had been promised. And it's not always on them. It sometimes is on us in defining what those skill sets are and the competencies are that we're looking for. And so this framework is really for hiring managers to figure out what sort of A player you're looking for and how to move that success rate of a candidate from 50% to over 90%. And I believe that a lot of the companies who use this framework as a practice do have a 90% success rate because you can imagine there's a huge cost in opening a rec and finding the right people at the right level and the interview process and kind of sifting through who you're looking for. So it does come at a huge cost to the company. Then there's the whole 30, 60, 90, onboarding, learning, ramping up, delivering of results. So it comes to a huge cost to a company too. And this framework sort of gives you a really good, like a go-to-market on how to get the right person for your team. So it's kind of broken up to a couple of parts. I won't go through everything. A lot of this you can read up online, but a few things that I'd like to call out. So a scorecard, this is an example of a scorecard that they really encourage hiring managers to write down. It starts with a very clear mission of the role. Like, what is the one line statement mission of this person that if they were to achieve in the first year of being hired, you would call this to be a success and potentially an ROI met, right? And an ROI met would be, you're probably aware that a lot of companies, especially SaaS tech companies, startups especially, they measure a metric called average revenue per employee, which means per employee, what's the average revenue made? And if you have a high skilled leadership role hires in your company, let's say 25 hires you're making, which are called high leverage roles, you're potentially paying top dollar on bringing them in and giving them a really high comp, then what's the revenue multiple they should be making to even be profitable at that? So that metric becomes important. And so writing down what is that goal that you need to achieve for that company in the first year is super critical. And then it breaks down into what are the 2 or 3 outcomes you absolutely need from this candidate. And then the person that you are interviewing, you have to grade them against the criteria that you as a hiring manager has set up here. And then what would you grade them and why, right? Like, is this a core strength of theirs and they excel at it? Or this is a core competency we need and they seem to be okay with it. They didn't give me any compelling answers, no great examples. It didn't really come through my interview process. And so this grading is what they look at throughout all the interview rounds that they set up, and they ultimately tally the score. And typically for a lot of startups, at least what I've heard and what my company practiced as well, is that the scoring happens on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest. And typically we'd only consider candidates who went 8 and above. So we wouldn't even talk to a 6 or a 7, and there's no case to be made for a 6 to 7. And that's how you look at what is outstanding about this key candidate and how do they ladder up to the 3 core competencies that we've outlined. Any questions on this one? Any comments or knee-jerk reactions?
It's interesting to feel like YC is seeing so many companies, so potentially many companies are thinking this way.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking, Rashi, can you turn that for us into like, what does it mean in terms of questions? If you're a candidate, what can you expect if people have been trained on this model?
Yeah, I think what I've found a lot, Vero, is that you need to have as a candidate, you should have a pool of about at least 3 to 5 really solid examples that show the breadth and depth of your knowledge. And this should range from situational to impact to scope to conflict to feedback, failure, and learnings from those failures. What you're really trying to show them is why do you, and one of the frameworks I use for prepping for a job interview will show you how to try and identify the 2 to 3 core competencies a job role actually looks for and how to index on it, but to have multiple examples around it, because where as a hiring manager, I've kind of weeded out the 7s and 6s, where I've seen that they seem to have a similar pool of 1 to 2 examples and just not able to go more from there. And then you know that this person does not have that breadth of experience I'm looking for the specific job requirement. So I think that's a common practice we've seen. And the 8s and 9s always, they will have a lot of detailing around it and potentially a couple of examples. Alex, your hand's raised.
Yeah, Rasha, thanks. Just curious what this framework says about startups trying to compete with large companies, right? For the talent and getting access to the top talent, because quite often, right, it's a challenging problem to hire talent, top talent.
Yeah, it's a really good question and a real problem I think a lot of startups face. I can tell you what we've done in the past couple of startup roles that I've taken from the hiring committee perspective. A lot of startups kind of define their high leverage roles. So a high leverage role is a high impact role that you believe is going to be very key to driving revenue and growth for the company. Now, if you're an intensely product-led company where a person can go to your website and self-serve, so they can self-checkout and sign up for your product, you probably want to over-index on customer experience and product, right? Those who are building your product experience. If you're a sales-led organization, then GTM leadership roles become high leverage roles. Growth roles become very, very, very important. If you're in a B2B company where content is king and content loops are what's helping in virality for people to understand about your product and your solution, then content roles become really, really important. Where I'm going with this is once you've identified your high leverage roles, you kind of work with your finance team to figure out the capital investment you want to make in them, which is, it's kind of like not even proportional. It's, I think, quite significantly higher as a multiple. And then you have a basic stack of executors and operators that are kind of needed within the company. So you balance it out. And I think a second thought on that would be I don't think one can compare with tech talent, right? Because then the kind of top dollars other companies are paying. One of the things I loved about this framework is the definition of an A player is not someone who has gone and killed it at Google. Because if they've killed it at Google, in fact, we believe the opposite, that they won't be able to function in our environment, because the company that I specifically work for sold to pharmaceuticals and big pharma. That's very different as a whole industry than Google, for example. So we looked for an A player from similar sized companies. So we actually had a list of companies who have solved similar problems, not in our landscape, and then looked for talent who have solved similar problems, and then put them through rigorous interviewing process, where what, at least at the company, what we looked for was something called first principles thinking. Sahil Bloom, I don't have the link here, but Sahil Bloom has a phenomenal a YouTube link on what first principles thinking is. And I think a lot of Y Combinator founders kind of use that, and I can put it on the chat when I have a few minutes. But first principles thinking, the ethos is that you can build from the ground up. You can go from 0 to 1, and you are demonstrating thinking that you can just take any case study or any problem and actually solve it from a framework and fundamental standpoint. And you're not copying and pasting that, hey, we did this at this company in this way, and I could bring that to the table, is actually a red flag. You don't want that.
Yeah, I feel like first principles have become something really that founders look for, but not always super defined too. So yeah, I want to keep us moving. Rashi, maybe go to some of the following slides. Just since we all hear about candidate and many people are looking, I think this is a good recap of potential questions they should prepare for.
Yeah. I'll quickly move through these ones. I've given samples of the screening interview and the kind of questions you can ask people and what are the flags that you're looking for. One interviewing tip I can give you, and I've learned this from a lot of interviews, is ask short, concise, open-ended questions. Don't preempt them. And the moment they give you their answer, dig deeper with what? Oh, tell me more about that. Why did you find that challenging? Why did you think that this was driving impact? And so on and so forth. So that's like a really good way of digging deeper. And then there's something called a top grading interview that we also do. This takes about 3 to 5 hours, but it basically goes down a chrono lane of every single role you've had at every company. Why did you take it? What did you achieve? What did you learn? Sort of a format. I've given a lot of examples of what each of these rounds are and what questions they ask. So we'll be sharing this deck after the chat, and you'll take a deeper look at it. The career walkthrough is just what I said. Just one key highlight on this one is, if a candidate is talking more about being pushed out of role, or my team was axed, or my role was axed, is typically a flag for them. A lot of people who follow this framework are looking for the pull mechanism and not a push mechanism, that, oh, like my previous manager went to a new company in a leadership role and she brought me in, is a big sign that your credibility is built and your manager believed in you. It's just an example, but more a pull mechanism of how you land your future roles.
Yeah, maybe just to pause on a second. I think it's a really important one, is as you prepare for your job interview, how you tell the story of your transitions. And some of these transitions may have been painful, but also seeing the positive in it, and really framing it in a way that seems like an upgrade and not something that you have to deal with. I think those examples are really good. And I don't know if you have more. You mentioned some of it before, Rashi, with me too, how you think about telling the narrative basically of these transitions in a way that is understandable and positive.
Yeah, I think one common thing that I hear from a lot of people who reach out to me is, extraordinary circumstances that, compelled you to move out of the role. It could be a lot of management change, a lot of flux, chaotic culture, not seeing how you can grow, toxic culture, things that are real life problems. But usually, as a candidate, you can't really go and talk negatively about the old company. If you take on a lot of personal problems and those were the reasons why you left, then it kind of reflects badly on you, that you can't really share, have those problems solved, or will you bring that baggage into my company and role? So a good framework that, shout out to Piper, because I recently learned this from him, on how to kind of do the framing is, anything that the job that you're applying for or the role that you're applying for is offering, if you use that as something that was missing in the last role and say, and that's why I'm a good fit for your company in this role, and I was inspired to apply for this role, is a good framing. And an example of that would be, the old company I worked worked at. The last role didn't allow me flexibility because we were selling to only one vertical, whereas you're multi-vertical, and a lot more scope for creativity and, you know, marketing channels that are available. So as a marketer, that's something that really, you know, fulfills my creative needs and marketing needs. It's something I'm passionate about, is a good way to say why you're kind of transitioning. So try and pick up what the role that you're applying for is offering you. Maybe it's a management position and the last role didn't have a management scope. I think those are better reasons to frame as to why you are, especially if you're trying to explain why this transition and you really don't want to be candid about it.
Yeah. And not to just, you know, worry about imposter syndrome. Also realize when people pull you out because you were brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting.
No, all good.
Red flags. Yeah. Important. What are
Red
people to
flags
look
is
like as red flags?
an actual list on the book. They actually talk about all the red flags that to look for in candidates. Simple things like taking credit for everything, not mentioning other colleagues who were really, you know, played a critical role in the success of the project or the program. These are lists that people actually look for. So y'all can read this in your own time, but super intuitive, but also something to keep your, you know, keep remembering, right, when you're going into an interview process. So it's kind of about the hiring manager hat and, you know, this framework that a lot of companies, at least in the startup world, seem to be using these days. I'm going to pivot a little bit to one of my favorite questions that a lot of people ask me is finding the company candidate PMF. How do you find the right role in the right company for you? Because oftentimes when you're in the job hunt mode, you really need a job to pay the bills. That's the reality. But now you have to figure out what's the best fit for you. There are a few things that have helped me in my career to think about this, and hopefully some of these nuggets can help you too. I break this down to 3 core types of companies, which is super early stage. Think about those, you know, listings you see from 0 to 10 employees, stealth, seed, 10 to 50 employees, those sort of companies. Then there's the mid-sized companies, which are no longer a startup, still functioning like a startup, but going to become a bigger company. And then there's big tech, of course. The needs of these companies are fundamentally different. And you have to figure out for yourself that, A, what is your skill and what is the skill that you can bring to this team. Are you passionate about that? Would that make you happy in the morning to get up and go to do work like that? For example, early stage is going very 0 to 1. It's building core functions, building channels, potentially with limited resources. They're looking for a lot of uniqueness in you and a lot of specialization in you. And if there are areas that you feel that you excel at and you could bring it, it's a win. If you feel like you're more of a generalist as a marketer, may not be the right thing for you. They also look for both breadth of knowledge as well as depth of knowledge. So maybe you're an SEO expert, or maybe you are a growth PM expert. What is that expertise that they're looking for? But early stages is also very hard because of the limited resources, right? Like it's very hard because you have to do a lot of things in the weeds. You don't have automation, you don't have teams, probably long hours, probably lack of work-life balance, and a lot of other kind of challenges that you're trying to navigate. On the flip side of it, I've often seen a lot of people want to take on those roles because if you're in a senior leadership role and you're trying to get an executive role for yourself, like a head of marketing or a head of function, this is a fantastic place to really own it, test yourself, upskill yourself, push yourself out of your comfort zone, and see whether this is something for you or not. Typically, I'm a big fan of startups as well as early stage startups because the amount of impact you can make and kind of more adjacent knowledge and skills you can learn and pick up. I don't think big sized companies offer that. And an example of that would be, I've been in startups where I've helped my head of marketing with board decks and VC pitch decks and things that I would never think of before, or, you know, really have to figure out how do you build a deck to say the best story and how you're going to market. So I think those are some of the wins in early stage. Mid-sized companies are usually looking for also very specialized people, the T-shaped marketer, if you've seen that famous diagram of what is T-shaped. They're looking for stellar performance and they're looking for growth, velocity, and speed, right? Like that's what they're looking for. How can you scale and how can you scale really quickly? Big tech are large teams, very global teams. People going from startup to, you know, big tech can find that very challenging as well, because now you have to work with multiple work streams and leadership teams to figure out how all of the pieces connect and where you fit into that. So I think kind of understanding this at a very fundamental level and then choosing what size of team is right for you is often important. And I think like one of the things that you kind of bring this out is in the reverse interview, which I think is so important. And I know that most interviews leave a couple of minutes, 2 minutes at the end to ask questions. And I think that happens a lot. I want to encourage everyone that if you're going from big tech, especially from a company like Google to a startup, I don't think that there's any question that's off the table. And I think the more compelling questions you ask, and the bolder you are, it demonstrates your thinking and it demonstrates whether you're the right fit for that company or not, and vice versa. So the thing that I want to pivot to a little bit is like, what is that evaluation process? So back channel references, reach out to folks who work at that company or have worked at that company and ask to set up a call and say, hey, I'd just like to know about your experience working in that company. Doing a working session or a brainstorm session and offering that to a startup with the core group of people you'll work with is a great offer. And I don't think any startup will say no. I have had roles where people have tapped into me and we've said, okay, let's do a working session. Let's do this GTM strategy workshop for 3 months. And let's see if we would like to work with each other. Is a great way to understand about the company and its customers and product, as well as for them to evaluate you. Understanding the core PMF and TAM potential, and I'll come back to the TAM potential, so hold your thought. Things to look for is, what is the natural growth driver of the company? You have to be able to answer that by the end of the interview process. If you can't figure out what is or what can potentially drive growth in that company through the interview process, then I'm afraid you've not figured out the company at all. Is it SEO? Is it content? Is it word of mouth virality? A huge market segment being tapped into? There has to be something that naturally is going to help them grow. I think trying to understand that as a growth marketer is an art and skill. And we can talk about this in the live discussion, but it's something that's super important. Couple of other ideas, but also like things like other adults at the table. Sometimes at the startups, you'll find like a lot of young people, inexperienced people, they've quit like something and gone into YC and become a startup founder. That's great, but do some of the leadership team members have some veterans and seasoned executives who've been in the business for a long time?
Rashi, maybe I would love to hear from the group. Just pause for a second. How people have made those decisions, or I know many of you are in the process of looking for a new role. Anything you want to share about your own process for assessing the right fit? Still thinking about it? Or Jennifer, are you?
Veronique, are you asking from hiring perspective or finding
From a
job
candidate perspective,
from
yeah,
a
when you're
candidate
assessing
perspective?
who's going to be a good fit right now.
I think one thing that I'm finding is that they're not asking very direct questions. I find that Rashi, you're very good at this, where you're kind of talking and you're giving examples. And I find that I'm someone who I work best when they are prompting me and they're sort of giving me more guidance on the kinds of answers that they're looking for, so that I can feel prepared for and give them exactly what they're looking for. And you sort of mentioned a reverse interview, and I don't know if this is what you're getting at, but I think that what I found to work for me is that I then ask questions for them about what they're doing today. Then I can give an example of what I've done in the past, and then like what I think I would bring to the company if I were to solve the question or solve the problem that's at hand.
Regards to your experience, have you had companies, especially startups, where they've openly shared numbers with you, or you asked for it and they've given you some sort of strategic answer in terms of number of customers you have, number of users you have, what's your ARR? Have you had that experience?
I've asked and I've gotten a range. So they would say more than 100, for example.
Right.
So that answer does come up, but there's nothing extremely specific. And then they're not saying from 100, we want to get to 1,000 by X date. I think there's still a little bit of vagueness in those answers that I get.
Got it. I think it sometimes happens when startup or the person who's interviewing also doesn't really know, but I get that preempting a little bit and giving context to candidates is super helpful. Elisa, you have your hand raised as well.
Yeah, sure. I think the most successful careers that I've been hired for have been either where I feel like I connect with the hiring manager on like a values level basis, or we've talked about, we're both equally passionate, I think, and informed about like a major customer problem or a major business problem. I think talking about values, though, is particularly challenging because you're not always going to find the opportunity to talk about that with someone.
Yeah.
But passionate about the customer problem, I love that. I think usually, especially if you talk to the founder, that's what got them to start a business. So if you align on passion for solving that problem, you probably win a lot of points early. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. I wanted to leave you all with a framework which has been kind of created by Bengali Kaba. For those of you who may not be familiar with him, he is a phenomenal product manager, product lead at companies like Meta, Instacart, Instagram, currently at YouTube. He built this really good framework that I've been using for a while. I've linked the source of the article so you all can read it. But the TLDR on this is that solve for impact in the role that you're going for. And part of the equation of this is impact equals to environment into skills. So when you're assessing the company that you want to, or the role that you want to get, you have to assess the environment of the company through various reverse interview techniques and questions that you can ask, and think about the skills. And within these are certain components that I want to kind of quickly share with you all. And the idea being that impact is going to be a direct product of these two variables. So where environment is concerned, the kind of things he talks about is think about the scope of the role. Like, do you think this is like a one and done? Would this get axed in a year? Does this ladder up to a larger, broader vision and, you know, broader impact within the organization? And try to assess that out. Manager, culture, resources I found very interesting. Your success and ability to be able to deliver on results in a role is highly dependent on the resources given to you. So if you are coming in at a director level or a head of function level, resources being who are the team members, what are the credibility and experiences, are they all aligned to the vision and the strategy and the execution from there? Resources could also mean, of course, the capital investment, funding, runway, things like that. But resources also are what kind of resources do you have to be successful in your own role, right? And think about how do they plan that, and how does your manager plan to empower you with more of it? Understanding team and who's on the team. I think we often don't ask about this. We sometimes ask about the structure and who's who what, but understanding what they bring to the table and what skills they have and how would yours be complementary to them is pretty critical. I believe that compensation is just an outcome of it, but I think the higher the impact, higher the compensation. But solve for impact, I think compensation is the byproduct. On the skill side, a couple of things that he says is super important is strategic thinking. How much strategic thinking are you, would this role allow you to bring to the table? Just the thoughts around execution, like what could be coming in the way, what's going to stop you from achieving your results, influence both among your peers and team members as well as leadership. Core skills, like how many core skills do you actually have for this role to be successful, and how many would you have to develop because you have no idea how to do that? And there's communication. And in both sides of the spectrum, the two main variables, because no two variables are equal, but the two variables that, Bengali says that are absolutely critical to your success and impact, the delivery of impact, on the environment side is your manager. Are they effective for that role and that organization? Example, if the culture is hard, difficult, chaotic, do they bring that method to that madness? Are they able to understand the situation and give you clarity into your role and your goals and what you have to achieve? Because you're looking for an effective manager for that environment, not necessarily for something else. And communication, I think it's often understated how much of a storyteller you really have to be. Communication both to your peers of, what you're trying to achieve, what the plan is, what the goals are, as well as communication to executive leadership as to how you plan to get there and why you're the best person for the job or why you should be investing in this project in the first place are two things to kind of optimize for. And that's what you're looking for in that interview process. And those are the two things that should really come out as key. I'm going to keep moving on in the interest of time. We had a lot of good examples of the reverse interview and what are high signal and low signal questions. So examples of low signal questions are, what's the company culture? What does career growth look like? And the reason I say that these are low signal is because these are very loaded questions. You'll typically not really be able to get much from the answer except for, here's my answer. Great. What do I do about that? But what you really have to do is get past that sales pitch and understand truly how working in that company would be. Because there are a lot of examples here, we won't go over them in detail, but some of these questions that I've taken and the sources are all linked. I'd highly encourage you all to kind of take a look at it. If I were to give you one example, I'd pick, when was the last time you used one of the company values to make a hard decision? What were 2 to 3 examples of decisions you expect this person in this role to make simultaneously? I think this becomes a very critical question if you're at a director or a senior leader role and you also have a head of marketing, to kind of understand where's the kind of, line you're drawing in the sand between each other. But some really, really solid, thoughtful questions over here that you all can take a look at. Again, a whole list of questions over here. I love the one over here, which I wanted to highlight was, if you were CEO, what would you be doing differently? And there's another question somewhere here on this list that says, what do you think is coming in the way from us to become a $100 million company? And this is more keeping startups in mind, so not really big tech, but I think super helpful. And a couple of others. These questions I'd highly encourage you to take a look at, because the first question here is from a candidate who was interviewing at Cruise, which is the autonomous vehicle car company. And it shows a really good example of the kind of research the candidate actually did to show that they were interested in the role, which I think is super phenomenal. I'm going to move to the prep section and like the format that we have. But before I move on, any thoughts, comments on that section? Anything anyone wants to share?
I would love to hear if people have asked really tough questions in a reverse interview.
Yeah.
If you have any.
Hi, this is Jen Barth, and I apologize. My signal's a little weak, so I'm going to keep my camera off. I think I left Google and ended up going to a startup, and I was going into a chief of staff role and it was the company's first time having a chief of staff. And one of the last questions I asked the CEO was, what am I going to learn on day one that no one's thought to tell me?
Oh, that's a good
That's a
one.
good one. Yeah.
And again, it depends on the role, but for this type of thing, it's a generalist type role. And to your point earlier, you get such great experience to do a lot of different things that are not within, a scope role that you would have at Google.
Yeah.
And also something that I will add, not just doing the research or doing the research on some background. I actually was going through and I was looking for my job, and I would go to YouTube and look for any interviews or podcasts these folks have done, especially, their conference speakers and things of that nature. Was able to glean a lot about the person before I went in and interviewed with them.
That's a really, really good tip.
Yeah. Podcasts are incredible. I feel like people, because they don't have the video, they share so much more than probably a corporate comp would let people share. It's it's a treasure trove most often.
Yeah.
I've definitely listened to podcasts of heads of marketing or heads of a function that I'm interviewing for to see, and if they have an interview, of course, and that's lucky if you do, but if you've seen them in a conference, I sometimes also try to match their pace and their tone. So understanding so it helps you to vibe with the person a lot easier, I find. Okay, let's move to the prep section because I want to make sure there's some time at the end for some live discussion as well. Not a foolproof method, but I came across this method in an article a year and a half ago. It's called the MVIP, which is Minimum Viable Interview Prep. And it has changed my life. Because prep for an interview I've said this in my LinkedIn post, it's a full-time job. It's so hard. Like, what do you not prep on? Your core concepts, your skills, the company, competition, landscape, yada, yada, yada. This framework has really, really helped me do better in my interviews. And so I've reduced the number of companies I interview at and have had a greater success rate than trying to interview everywhere. Essentially, and I've obviously shared the whole link of the article, which is absolutely phenomenal. And I'd encourage you to take a look at it and read it. Great examples by Coach Erica. She was featured on Lenny's Substack, and that's where I got the article. Talks about a couple of things: know the role and how to map to it. Walk down the memory lane, and this comes from that career chronological interview process that we were talking about earlier, and how to prep for it. Crafting a really compelling elevator pitch for yourself. This is very, very key to convince everyone throughout the interview process that you're the person for the job. How do you master behavioral? I won't be spending a lot of time here because Coach Erica has a very good article with great examples on how to prepare for behavioral, STAR framework, all of that. So I think y'all can do that in your own time. And then there's nailing the assignment and the whole debate on companies taking free work during the interview process, especially startups. Should you do it? Should you not? How do you do it? How do you go about it? And a live example from an assignment I did for one of the roles I actually got. So let's dig into it. The first part of it is super simple. It's a template that Coach Arikash provided where you take the job description and you go through it a little bit like a nerd, line by line, and you highlight keywords that kind of come up. And if you've been at Google, keywords should be easy. And you highlight the keywords that stand out to you. And that kind of starts bringing out column B, which is job description concept. And so for the example that she gives is multi-data center, automation, resolve technical issues, on-call rotation, etc. For each of these themes that emerge that seem to be the core competencies that they're looking for, you have to kind of start writing your own matched experiences to speak to it with examples, success metrics, learnings, failures, etc. This really, really is helpful because sometimes you're like, oh my God, my last interview was like 3 years ago. I don't remember what I did in that company. So this framework really, really helps. And a pro tip, ChatGPT has made life super easy. So I would just take a whole JD, put it into ChatGPT and say, please give me the biggest key themes or core competencies as highlighted in this role. And so it has worked so far for me and, do a bit of your work, but I think ChatGPT speeds up the process. I wanted to give an example of how I did it for one of the companies I applied for. One of the key things that they were looking for was building and developing a team. So examples of specific companies, the size of team, the hiring methodology, and how did I go about kind of managing those people. The second core theme was digital marketing strategy and growth marketing plans to meet business objectives. And then they go on to explain awareness, engagement, lead gen, conversion optimization. And I had specific examples from companies of where I've done digital strategy, automation, recommendations engines, working at the scale that I did, which is driving 1 million in incremental sales from our project, budget modeling and what sort of propensity it had. And so it's really, really breaking it down to the specific examples per the competency that they're looking for. Again, this kind of goes on to say that there's a lot about the website optimization and CRO and what were my specific experiences towards that. So I think it's a super helpful framework and hopefully it helps all of you all. So definitely do it. Do this as a practice for a lot of JDs also so that you can get really good at it and start really bringing out themes from your own career that helps you sell your own story. This is an example of how I took the JD that existed and built out this map. So kind of nothing new there. I start building a word cloud from here. Once those themes come out of those core competencies, the prep really is the key here. So for example, the key concepts from me that came out for that role was digital strategy, attribution, revenue initiatives and operations, PLG and SLG convergence, which is product-led growth and sales-led growth, and how do they talk to each other if an organization is dependent on both vehicles for growth? How do you optimize and what are the metrics you look for? What are the high signals in them? Under management of people, how do you develop people? Examples of being resourceful, because that was something that was written in the JD. ABM personalization, which spoke to customer segmentation and persona development. Lead routing and development, which mapped back to any sort of demand generation and awareness and lead gen. GTM execution, and then a couple of tools. And the thing that's highlighted in red is the area that I didn't have experience in, which was partner with growth engineering team on self-serve campaigns and product-led growth initiatives. The reason I highlight that is there will be a few line items in the JD that you'll find that, I don't seem to have experience there. And the thing that I found is if you don't have an exact example, the way to address these questions during an interview is to talk about your approach to it. Like if you were tasked with this to go to a growth engineering team and pitch a self-serve campaign and talk about the cost benefit analysis, how would you go about doing that? And one thing that I found super helpful during this phase of the interview and a question that I don't have a direct example for is to talk through a framework that demonstrates your fundamental knowledge about that particular topic. So that's how the kind of the thematic keywords also help you, prepare for different topics and concepts. And one example I wanted to give on digital strategy is, sure, I've had paid media background and I've done multiple Google ads and Facebook ads and social media ads, etc. But really what they're looking for is a POV, like what's your perspective on it? And typically I've found that if you talk about things like CAC payback period, LTV analysis, budget modeling, and give examples on there, it really shows whether you have not just the competency, but you also exceeds expectations at it. So that's something that has really helped me in my prep. I wanted to give examples that when they say digital strategy and, own all paid channels and own channels, like the POV I'd bring to the table would be a guide on ARR, a guide on LTV to CAC analysis. Are they the right metrics? A TAM masterclass, like what does total addressable market really mean? And which is the right channel to tap into that TAM? The Law of Shitty Click-Through Rates is a phenomenal article written by Andrew Chen, which talks about why the paid media costs will always rise, and finding viral loops and growth loops is so much more critical than doing acquisitions via paid channels, et cetera, et cetera. I've also shared these resources with anyone in the room who might find this helpful. If you're in the same field, have a similar experience, so hopefully that's helpful. But the idea really being that it's not just about examples of those things, but it's a demonstration of where you meet expectations versus where you exceeds. And typically I found that the two things that really help candidates stand out is using very structured frameworks, as well as having a almost controversial, but at least a perspective. Like, what is your perspective on this metric? Is it the right metric to optimize for? What do you think? Like, do you think we should, is a user sign up a vanity metric, or a paid user sign up a better metric, and why? So things like that. Yeah.
I think what you shared, Rashi, is so important, because it's almost like, even if you have some weaknesses or lack of experience, you can still gain back some control of the interview process, and then framing the problem in a way that you still shine. Even if you don't have the experience, you have the framework, and you add on top of all the concrete examples you've already given. So very powerful.
Yeah.
Very good prep, but let's keep going. Memory lane.
I'll skip over the memory lane. It's a really cool way to go through each of your roles. I don't know how many companies practice this, but a lot of companies will do a 2 to 3 hour interview on your career chronology, which means they'll go into every single role you've had, the manager you reported to, why were you brought onto the role, what did you contribute to it, what was the impact, learnings, and why did you move on? It happens. It's from personal experience. And those interviews are stressful, they're long, they're time consuming. But I've given some of my tips that have helped me go through that career chrono back, because a lot of startups do that. Why you elevator pitch? Your career is a story, you are the product, you have to learn how to sell it. And I'm going to give you a few quick examples of kind of how to craft your own. I think if you do the role mapping thing the template that I shared, that has helped me immensely in just telling my story. I used to be the person who would start with, I was born in India, nobody's interested, to my elevator pitch has now completely evolved over time as to why did I pick the roles I picked? What was unique about it? What did I do differently? And why I'm a great fit for you. So we'll talk about this, and I want to give an example of kind of how to go about it. If you do the career chronology, and if you map the core competencies with specific examples, I think very naturally you will find a theme emerging from your own career that becomes your story and your elevator pitch. And to give you an example, I started at Google in the ad sales department, digital marketing, selling to DSO as well as DSS clients, moved on to a startup. And the next few startups I went to, when I look back into my career chronology, I realized I was one of the earliest marketing hires there, either within the marketing team at large or within the specific function that I was hired for. And it quickly appeared to me that, oh, kind of, that's right. Like, I've kind of been the first person to launch this channel and the first person to do it. And then eventually we proved the success in that channel and we met our metrics and goals. And then I was given budget to go hire more people, at first not reporting to me, and eventually it did. And so very quickly from that story, what really emerged is my focus has been a lot on new customer acquisitions. Last couple of roles I've taken have been a combination of both product-led SaaS companies as well as sales-led motions. And so how do I converge those, and why I've had that experience and what have I contributed to that? The fact that I've gone from 0 to 1 building, and this story has been super compelling in the startup space, because a lot of folks in startups are looking for folks who can go from 0 to 1, because it's the hardest thing to do. And 0 to 1 means launching the first channels, hiring the first few people, figuring out the process, setting the OKR, setting the budget, asking for investments, proving the success, and also influence both top and up. So I think that kind of became one of my themes. The other thing I called out on my elevator pitch was I'm a first principles thinker as a result of it. And so what that means is the last 2 startups I worked at were first movers or category builders. They were new in their space. They were the first people, identified a segment and a customer segment and a product segment, and married the two. So I kind of realized that that was a theme in my career that I had been drawn to, and something that kind of surfaced up in my elevator pitch. And then I took specific examples of ABM programs that I've launched, and as well as new user growth programs that I've worked on, both on acquiring new users as well as converting them from free to paid users, as 2 really key things, and how that lends to customer segmentation and persona development. And then that kind of is my elevator pitch today, and that's what's unique about me. I wanted to share this because I feel like not a lot of people have either crafted their elevator pitch, or if they have, they've not really shared it out wide. But I think I wanted to show how some of these frameworks and practices have just lent to its story, where I used to not say the story like this years ago. Again, I think this elevator pitch is, I think it's pretty neat for a startup going 0 to 1 and all of those things. Not necessarily something that will help if you're going to a larger stage company. So you will have to tailor and change it according to their needs. Any questions, thoughts?
Yeah, I think chat is, we have a lot of people very impressed about all the depths and all the work that came into this elevator pitch. So thank you for sharing, Rashi.
Yeah, great. Behaviorals, we don't have too much time left, so I won't go over it, but a really cool framework and then a source from where I got it. Nailing the assignment, I don't think we have time to really get into it, but a lot of debate on should you do the assignment, should you do the case study that startups give. I would argue that if a startup does not give you a case study, I wouldn't join a startup without it. A lot of reasons. It really, really helps you give a primer of the kind of work you'll be doing. Once you give the presentation, it allows you to get into a lot of thoughtful debate and discussion with the founders, with different leadership team members, and it gives you a flavor of who you will really be working with, what gets approved, what gets axed, and why. Do they understand marketing? Do they understand growth marketing? Do they understand what I'm doing or what I'm going to bring to the table? I've had this debate with a lot of folks in startups that, oh, it's free work, I'm never going to do it. It's so many hours of work, but I think it's a must. Couple of research tips I can give you is follow the 3 C's. What's the company about? Who's the customer? What's the context? And build your assignment tailored to that. Another tip is How They Grow is a phenomenal blog about different companies and how they've gone from 0 to 100 million ARR and beyond. And a lot of those success stories, like Canva did it with SEO, Pinterest did it with SEO, Duolingo did it with gamification. It really gives you an idea of problem solving from a very different perspective. And it gives you a lot of cool ideas on how to incorporate that into your own assignment. Also, the assignment is a great way to ask reverse interview questions throughout if you don't get the time in the other stages of the interview process. So I think it's a must. And a tip would be to break down the assignment into sizable parts. Usually it's pretty complex and a lot of data. I think they give you the data to just strip you up, but focus on the keyword. What is the one thing that they're looking for? Live example, y'all can read this in your own time, of what was given to me for a customer acquisition role, which is a director of acquisitions role. The 2 things I highlighted was they wanted a framework to present an acquisition strategy and what is your difference in your approach. And that's really what I took and I ran with. This was a framework that I took and then I put it into the context of the company, which is what are the 4 key loops of growth that drive user growth for a company and new acquisition growth, and what are the channels that lend to it. And then I also said that what will be the cost benefit analysis in blue. Like paid loop could become very costly very quickly. So it depends on how much capital we have, but it does give us, if you do the right channels, it could get us really quickly users because you're paying for those users, so you get it really faster. Engineering viral loops and UGC loops are a lot harder, but probably have more long-term returns. So it opened up a lot of discussion with the executive team who was interviewing me, and that was really great. Again, I actually built a growth loop for that company that I was interviewing for, of assumptions of how they're growing today and how I think they can be growing. So as you see, like, frameworks are really helping me demonstrate my knowledge, fundamental knowledge of user growth. And then this was the over and above, and something my professor taught in school is what gets you an A+ and what's a B-. And in other words, in corporate language, it would be what is a meets expectations and what is an exceeds. And I think you should do that thinking before you go into that interview is my answer a meets or an exceeds? And to get to an exceeds, the simplest way that I think about it is, actually Google taught this, what is the new thinking you're bringing to the table that they have probably not thought of before? And you really have to hone in on that. And you may hit it or you may miss it, but it's worth thinking. So the measurement piece was my exceeds expectations because they asked for it and I missed giving it in the presentation. I asked for feedback from the hiring manager. He was extremely nice. He said, I think you could have spoken a little bit more on the measurement piece. I went to town, spent 48 hours building this out on all the assumptions and frameworks. All the numbers are vanity metrics. I made them up, but I showed them the thinking of the number of different factors I would think, and then how would I compare two programs, which is basically Google Ads acquisitions, and compare it to influencer marketing acquisitions. And instead of measuring the number of people we acquire, we would actually stack rank them based on the growth rate that they have, which shows you the speed or the velocity at which you're growing, which is so critical at a startup. And I believe this is what really got me that 8 on that scorecard. So again, I'll share this with you. Hopefully it's helpful. Last but not the least, invest as much you can on your storytelling. Communication is a key skill that people don't talk about, and storytelling is everything in your interview process. Look for referrals. Referrals are great. I think if you go to LinkedIn today and you look for a job, 100+ applicants, that's hard. 500+ applicants. I will tell you, as being on the other side, a lot of the times, recruiters don't even look at those because there are so many marketers in the market. But what really helps is a referral. And if you don't know someone in the company, find people through some connection, or just reach out to random people and send 100 notes to 100 different people and say, I'm looking for a role in your company. Would you be open to a 30-minute conversation to share a little bit more about the culture of the company? Just keen to learn. And that's a great way to, a 15-minute chat also is great. And when they do, ask them if they're open to referring you, is one way to cold call people and get in. That was power-packed, and I'm sorry we rushed through so many different segments, but I promise you everything is sourced, linked, and we'll share the deck out with everyone here and who registered, and hopefully it's helpful.
Thank you so much, Rashi. I feel like even the last tip you gave about asking feedback to the recruiter in the middle of the process and reverting or accelerating the yes was so powerful. So thank you for candidly sharing. I think Rashi and I, we can stay a few more minutes. So if people want to, share feedback or have questions, happy to answer them.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
So do people feel energized, and are you going to make any change in the way you're approaching your job search right now?
Yeah, I actually had one question. Thank you so much. This was very, very helpful. My question was around the.
It's been out of work for 6 months.
Sorry, okay. My question was around the final portion, the assignment portion. You mentioned to be just extremely, it seemed very thoughtful the way that you approached it. I was curious to know, did you ask them questions before actually starting your assignment, or were you mostly working based off of assumptions?
Good question, and I asked questions. I think that's almost a thumb rule, that always clarify. Even the simplest things that you think you know are actually, it could be counterintuitive. So I found it to be helpful, and at least at startups, what I found is that if you reach out to the hiring manager on a personal email, which typically they'll share with you, and that's the kind of culture you're also looking for, you can always go back and say, hey, this is great. I think this is how I want to approach it. Is there any other guideline you want to give me? So I think clarifying questions is a must. There are a lot of assumptions baked in because, you can't ask 10 questions. You can narrow it down to maybe 1 or 2. And I would encourage you to think about what's the minimum viable information needed to be successful. Because I'll tell you, on that assignment where I got tripped up on the measurement was influencer marketing. I've not really done influencer marketing, and I didn't know how to assume how many influencers we could acquire over a period of 6 months, given the space was so niche. And then what is the growth rate of influencer acquired users? And I really wanted to ask him that, have you all tested this? Have you all done it? Do you have a baseline? But I chose not to, because the more important question for me was, do you want me to try and create a cost benefit analysis to pitch to growth engineering and see how much that would cost? And he said that, no, just focus on how would you measure the success of this, maybe compare it to a channel. So I compared it to two. So I think, yes, asking those clarifying questions is a must. Even if you think that you've got it and you understand the assignment, ask the questions, clarify it.
Thank you.
And also one more thing, Frida, is when you start your presentation, always start with a quick context setting that this was the question, the way I approach it is this. Segments I'm covering is ABC. Let me know right now if you feel like something is missing, and I can talk through it when I present it. So that's a great way of setting that expectation.
This happened a little while ago to me. So I was in an interview and sort of realized after the fact that I I had the right experience, but I didn't answer the question the way that the interviewer wanted me to. I thought of the experience afterwards. What would you do in a situation like that?
I would email them.
Yeah.
I often find that candidates nowadays, as a best practice or a rule of thumb, rather, if you will, would always send in a thank you note to the interviewer if you have the email, or at least tell the recruiter that please pass on my message. I have found it far more thought-provoking when candidates have come back with a reflection on the interview with a POV on something. So I'd absolutely encourage you to, even if it's a clarifying question that, when you asked me that, Rashi, I was wondering, is this the sort of problem you all are facing? And my approach would be this. I know you asked me about X. I didn't quite mention this, but I've actually had similar adjacent experience doing Y, which lends to this X very well. I think those notes have engaged me a lot as a hiring manager. So I've written back to them versus thank you for your time. It was great. I was like, great, good luck with your search. Like then it's a conversation stopper that way. So I would go back and say, I kind of thought about this because this question provoked me a lot. And maybe and just to make a joke out of it that, maybe it's the interview pressure and the 30 minutes I had and talking fast. But upon reflection, I wanted to make sure you know this, that this is a thing. And I'll tell you, just like my experience with startups here in the Bay Area is what I can speak to, because that's where my experience has been. In a startup world, if you're going from big tech to startup, they love simple language and conversational language. They are not into big tech jargon and acronyms and things that confuses them and trips them up. I've had founders tell me, dumb it down and speak to me like I'm a 5-year-old, because it also demonstrates your first principles thinking. So I would say make it conversational, make it funny, make it human, and I think they'd appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
And I want to tell everyone, we're going to send you a little survey just to get your feedback, suggestions, and then we'll give you the deck too.
Yeah. Well, I want to mention that if, hopefully you find it helpful, just give us feedback on the survey, and anything you wish we would have covered or gone slower on, etc. just helps us. We hope to do a lot of these sessions for a lot of folks like yourselves. And if you enjoyed, give us a shout out on LinkedIn. We'd really appreciate that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.